Section 8 of 6 Years with the Texas Rangers, 1875 to 1881. Read by Andrew Frame. Service with Reynolds, the Intrepid, Part 1. As soon as Sergeant Reynolds was commissioned first lieutenant, he was placed in command of Company E, then stationed in Coleman County, but immediately ordered to Lampasas. At this time, Captain Sparks resigned the command of Company C, and this company was also ordered to report to Lieutenant Reynolds at the same town. Late in August, the two commands went into camp at Hancock Springs. Major Jones then authorized Lieutenant Reynolds to pick such men as he desired from these two companies for his own company, and either discharge or transfer the remainder to other commands. No other officer in the battalion, I believe, was ever accorded this privilege. Lieutenant Reynolds had a week or 10 days in which to make his selection, so he studied the muster rolls of the companies carefully. He had ranged under such great captains as Perry, D.W. Roberts, Neil Coldwell, and with Major Jones himself. He knew what qualities were needed in a good ranger, and made his selections accordingly. From Old Company A, Reynolds selected C.L. Neville, Tom Gillespie, Shape Rogers, Jack Martin, John Gibbs, W.T. Clements, and 4 others whose names I do not now remember. These were the scouts that had helped him capture the Horals, and naturally were his first choice. From Company E came Dick Ware, who 1 year later killed the noted train robber Sam Bass, then served Mitchell County as its first sheriff for many years, and finally became United States Marshal for the Western District of Texas under President Cleveland's administration. Henry Thomas, Miller Moreland, George Arnett, and other Company E boys were selected. Henry Baltimore, Ben and Doc Carter, Bill Derrick, Chris Connor, Henry McGee, Abe Anglin, J.W. Warren, Dave Ligon, Low Hughes, George Hogg Hughes, and others were picked from Company C. When he exhausted the two companies, Reynolds turned to General Jones and said, "There's a ranger down on the Rio Grande in Neil Coldwell's company that I want." "Who is it?" asked the general. "Private Jim Gillett." "You shall have him," promised General Jones. "I will send an order to Captain Coldwell tonight to have Gillett report to you here." It was late in the evening when Company A's mail came in from Freotown, but Captain Coldwell sent for me as soon as General Jones's order arrived, and told me that I must leave the company next morning and report to the Adjutant General at Austin. I was nonplussed, for I did not know what the order meant. Out on the frontier where we were then operating, we seldom read newspapers or heard what the other companies were doing, so I did not even know that Reynolds had captured the Horrell boys and had been commissioned to command Company E. The following morning I bade Captain Coldwell and the Company A boys goodbye and started on my long ride to Austin. As I jogged along, I asked myself many hundred times why I was ordered to report at Austin, and boylike it made me nervous and uneasy. It took me 2 days to reach San Antonio and 3 more to get to Austin. I arrived in the latter town just at nightfall, but I was at the Adjutant General's office as soon as it was open next morning. Presently General Jones entered with some officers of the state militia. He shook hands with me and invited me to be seated, saying he had some business to attend to for the moment. It was probably an hour before the officers left, and the general could turn to me. He very kindly inquired as to my trip, and asked about Captain Coldwell and the company. He then told me about the arrest of the Horrell boys and Sergeant Reynolds' commission as First Lieutenant commanding Company E. Vice Lieutenant Foster resigned. He explained that Reynolds had requested that I be attached to his command and ordered me to report to my new commander in Lampasas without delay. I excused myself at once and lost no time in getting my horse out of the livery stable and resuming my way. A great load was lifted from my mind, and I was about as happy as a boy could be. I sang and whistled all the way to Liberty Hill, 30 miles from Austin. The following day, about 2 p.m., I rode into Reynolds' camp at Hancock Springs. I attracted some attention as I rode in, for I wore a big Mexican hat mounted with silver, and a buckskin jacket fringed from shoulder to elbow with a bunch of flowers braided in highly colored silk on its back. On my heels were enormous Mexican spurs. I never saw a ranger sent to the Rio Grande for the first time that did not rig himself out in some such outlandish attire, only to discard it a few weeks later, never to wear it again. I was no exception, and I think every man in camp tried on my hat. Lieutenant Reynolds selected C.L. Neville for first sergeant, Henry W. McGee as second sergeant, and J.W. Warren and L.W. Connor first and second corporals respectively. On September 1st, 1877, the company was sworn in. The new command was the most formidable body of men I had ever seen. Our commander, Lieutenant Reynolds, was over 6 feet tall and weighed probably 175 pounds. He was a very handsome man, a perfect blonde with steel blue eyes and a long, light mustache. At that time, he was about 30 years of age, vigorous in mind and body, and had a massive determination to succeed as a ranger. His mind was original, bold, profound, and quick, with a will that no obstacle could daunt. He was the best ranger in the world. There was never another like him. The lieutenant was a native of Missouri and was always known as Major or Mage Reynolds. It was said that Reynolds, though a mere boy, had served with the Confederates in the latter part of the Civil War. He was one of a party that captured a troop of Federal cavalry, the major of which was well supplied with clothing. The captors, however, were very scantily clad, and Reynolds appropriated the major's uniform, hence his nickname, Mage. In later years, when I had grown more intimate with him and was probably closer to him than any other, I mentioned this story. He neither affirmed nor denied it, declaring he was a Missourian by birth, a bootmaker by trade, and that his early history could interest no one. First Sergeant Neville was 6 feet and 1 inch in height and weighed 185 pounds. All the non-commissioned officers were at least 6 feet tall and built in proportion, and many of the privates were from 5 feet 11 inches to 6 feet in height. I was probably the lightest man in the company, being only 5 feet 9 inches and weighing but 140 pounds. When the company's roster was complete, Lieutenant Reynolds had but 28 men, lacking 2 of his full complement of 30. The company was then ordered to Austin, but before being assigned to its position on the frontier, the lieutenant enlisted John and Will Bannister, 2 celebrated frontiersmen. They were old cowboys, splendid shots, and well acquainted with every part of Kimball, Menard, Mason, and Kerr counties, in which Company E was destined to operate. In appearance and ability, this company compared favorably with any 30 Rangers ever sent to the Texas frontier. Nearly every member of the company had had more or less experience as an officer, and all were exceedingly fine marksmen. Sergeant Henry McGee had been Marshal of Waco and had figured in several pistol duels in that city. Dave Ligon, the oldest man in the command, had been a Confederate soldier and had served with General Forrest's cavalry. In the summer of 1877, Lieutenant Armstrong of Captain Hall's company, assisted by Detective Jack Duncan of Dallas, Texas, captured the notorious John Wesley Hardin. It has been said that Texas, the largest state in the Union, has never produced a real world's champion at anything. Surely such critics overlooked Hardin, the champion desperado of the world. His life is too well known in Texas for me to go into detail, but according to his own story, which I have before me, he killed no fewer than 27 men, the last being Charlie Webb, Deputy Sheriff of Brown County, Texas. So notorious had Hardin become that the state of Texas offered $4,000 reward for his capture. Hardin left Texas and at the time of his capture was in Florida. His captors arrested and overpowered him while he was sitting in a passenger coach. In September 1877, Sheriff Wilson of Comanche County, in whose jurisdiction Hardin had killed Webb, came to Austin to convey the prisoner to Comanche for trial. Wilson requested the governor for an escort of Rangers. Lieutenant Reynolds' company, being in Austin at the time, was ordered to accompany Wilson and protect Hardin from mob violence. This was the first work assigned to Company E under its new commander. The day we left Austin, between 1,000 and 2,000 people gathered about the Travis County jail to see this notorious desperado. The Rangers were drawn up just outside the jail, and Henry Thomas and myself were ordered to enter the prison and escort Hardin out. Heavily shackled and handcuffed, the prisoner walked very slowly between us. The boy that had sold fish on the streets of Austin was now guarding the most desperate criminal in Texas. It was glory enough for me. At his trial, Hardin was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in the penitentiary. He appealed his case and was returned to Travis County for safekeeping. The verdict of the trial court was sustained, and 1 year later, in September 1878, Lieutenant Reynolds' company was ordered to take Hardin back to Comanche County for sentence. There was no railroad at Comanche at the time, so a detachment of Rangers, myself among them, escorted Hardin to the penitentiary. There were 10 or 12 indictments still pending against him for murder in various counties, but they were never prosecuted. Hardin served 17 years on his sentence, and while in prison studied law. Governor Hogg pardoned him in 1894 and restored him to full citizenship. In transmitting him the governor's pardon, Judge W.S. Fly, Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals, wrote Hardin as follows. Dear Sir, enclosed I send you a full pardon from the Governor of Texas. I congratulate you on its reception and trust that it is the day of dawn of a bright and peaceful future. There is a time to retrieve a lost past. Turn your back upon it with all its suffering and sorrow, and fix your eyes upon the future with the determination to make yourself an honorable and useful member of society. The hand of every true man will be extended to assist you in your upward course, and I trust that the name of Hardin will be in the future associated with the performance of deeds that will ennoble his family and be a blessing to humanity. Did you ever read Victor Hugo's masterpiece, Les Miserables? If not, you ought to read it. It paints in graphic words the life of one who had tasted the bitterest dregs of life's cup, but in his Christian manhood rose about it, almost like a god, and left behind him a path luminous with good deeds. With the best wishes for your welfare and happiness, I am, yours very truly, W.S. Fly. Despite all the kind advice given him by eminent lawyers and citizens, Hardin was unequal to the task of becoming a useful man. He practiced law for a time in Gonzales, then drifted away to El Paso, where he began drinking and gambling. On August 19, 1895, Hardin was standing at a bar shaking dice when John Selman, constable of Precinct No. 1, approached him from behind, and placing a pistol to the back of Hardin's head, blew his brains out. Though posing as an officer, Selman was himself an outlaw and a murderer of the worst kind. He killed Hardin for the notoriety it would bring him, and nothing more. After delivering Hardin to the sheriff of Travis County in 1877, Lieutenant Reynolds was ordered to Kimball County for duty. Of all the counties in Texas at that time, Kimball was the most popular with outlaws and criminals, for it was situated south of Menard County on the North and South Llano rivers, with cedar, pecan, and mesquite timber in which to hide, while the streams and mountains furnished abundance of fish and game for subsistence. Up on the South Llano lived old Jimmy Dublin. He had a large family of children, most of them grown. The eldest of his boys, Dick, or Richard as he was known, and a friend, Ace Langford, killed 2 men at a country store in Langford's Cove, Coryell County, Texas. The state offered $500 for the arrest of Dublin, and the county of Coryell an additional $200. To escape capture, Dick and his companion fled west into Kimball County. While I was working as cowboy with Joe Franks in the fall of 1873, I became acquainted with the 2 murderers, for they attached themselves to our outfit. They were always armed and constantly on the watch out for fear of arrest. Dublin was a large man, stout, dark-complected, and looked more like the bully of a prize ring than the cowman he was. I often heard him say he would never surrender. While cow hunting with us, he discovered that the naturally brushy and tangled county of Kimball would offer shelter for such as he, and he persuaded his father to move out into that county. Dublin had not lived long in Kimball County before another son, Del Dublin, killed Jim Williams, a neighbor. Thus the 2 Dublin boys were on the dodge charged with murder. They were supposed to be hiding near their father's home. Bill Allison, Stark Reynolds, and a number of bandits, horse and cattle thieves and murderers were known to be in Kimball County, so Lieutenant Reynolds was sent with his company to clean them up. It was late in October 1877 before the company reached its destination and camped on the North Llano River below the mouth of Bear Creek. As soon as our horses had rested and camp was fully established for the winter, we began scouting. Several men wanted on minor charges were captured. We then raided Luke Stone's ranch, which was about 10 miles from our camp, and captured Del Dublin. He was fearfully angry when he found escape impossible. He tore his shirt bosom open and dared the Rangers to shoot him. While he was being disarmed, his elder brother Dick rode out of the brush and came within gunshot of the ranch before he discovered the presence of the Rangers. He turned his horse quickly and made his escape, though the Rangers pursued him some distance. When Dick learned that the Bannister boys and myself were with Lieutenant Reynolds' company and hot on his trail, he declared he would whip us with a quirt as a man would a dog if he ever came upon us, for he remembered us as beardless boys with Joe Frank's cow outfit. However, despite his threat, he never attempted to make it good, but took very good care to keep out of our way until the fatal January 18, 1878. There was no jail in Kimball County, so with a detachment of Rangers I took Del Dublin and our other prisoners to Llano County lockup. Shortly after, Reynolds selected Sergeant McGee, Tom Gillespie, Dick Harrison, and Tim McCarthy, and made a scout into Menard County. He also had with him his Negro cook, George, to drive his light wagon. On the return toward Bear Creek, the scout camped for the night at Fort McCavitt. At that time, each frontier post had its Chihuahua or scab town, a little settlement with gambling halls, saloons, and the like to catch the soldiers' dollars. At Fort McCavitt were many discharged soldiers, some of them Negroes from the 10th Cavalry. These blacks had associated with white gamblers and lewd women until they thought themselves the equals of white men and became mean and overbearing. On this particular night, these Negro ex-soldiers gave a dance in Scabtown, and our Negro, George, wanted to go. He was a light mulatto, almost white, but well thought of by all the boys in the company. He obtained Lieutenant Reynolds' permission to attend the dance, and borrowed Tim McCarthy's pistol to carry to it. When George arrived at the dance, the ex-soldiers did not like his appearance, as he was allied with the Rangers, whom they despised. They jumped on George, took his pistol, and kicked him out of the place. The boys were all in bed when George returned and told McCarthy that the Negroes at the dance hall had taken his pistol from him. Lieutenant Reynolds was sleeping nearby and heard what George said. He raised up on his elbow and ordered Sergeant McGee to go with McCarthy and George and get the pistol. The Negroes saw McGee coming and, closing the door, defied him to enter the dance hall. McGee was cool and careful. He advised the Negroes to return the pistol, but they refused, saying they would kill the first white-livered SOB that attempted to enter the house. The sergeant then stationed himself at the front door and ordered McCarthy to guard the back entrance of the place, and sent George for the lieutenant. Reynolds hurried to the scene, taking with him Tom Gillespie and Dick Harrison. The lieutenant knocked on the door and told the blacks he was the commander of the Rangers and demanded their surrender. They replied with an oath that they would not do so. Reynolds then ordered the house cleared of women and gave the Negroes just 5 minutes in which to surrender. Up to this time, the women had been quiet, but they now began to scream. This probably demoralized the Negro men. One of them poked McCarthy's pistol, muzzle foremost, out of a window. "Here, come and get your damn pistol," he said. McCarthy, a new man in the service, stepped up and grasped it. The instant the Negro felt the touch of McCarthy's hand on the weapon, he pulled the trigger. The ball pierced McCarthy's body just above the heart, giving him a mortal wound. At the crack of the pistol, the Rangers opened fire through the doors and windows on the Negroes within the house. Reynolds and his men then charged the place, and when the smoke of battle cleared, they found 4 dead Negro men and a little Negro girl that had been killed by accident. Only one black escaped. He was hidden under a bed, and as the Rangers came in, made a dash to safety under cover of darkness. McCarthy died the following day and was buried near Old Fort McCavitt. Negro George fought like a tiger and won the boys' praise. A few days afterward, the sheriff of Tom Green County, following the trail of a bunch of stolen cattle from San Angelo, came into our camp. Lieutenant Reynolds sent Sergeant Neville and a scout of Rangers with the sheriff. The trail led over to the South Llano, where the cattle were recovered. While scouting around the herd, Sergeant Neville discovered a man riding down the trail toward him. He and his men secreted themselves and awaited the stranger's approach. It was getting quite dark, and when the newcomer had ridden almost over the concealed Rangers without noticing their presence, they rose up, presented their guns, and ordered him to halt. "Yes, like hell!" he exclaimed, and turning his horse, dived into a cedar brake. A shower of bullets followed, but failed to strike the fugitive. This was the notorious Dick Dublin, with a $700 reward on his head. Sergeant Neville returned to camp with about 50 head of burnt cattle, but let the most notorious criminal in the county escape. Lieutenant Reynolds was disappointed at this, and said he did not understand how 4 crack Rangers could let a man ride right over them and then get away. He declared his Negro cook could have killed Dublin had he been in their place. This mortified the boys a great deal. The latter part of December 1877, Lieutenant Reynolds sent a scout out on Little Saline, Menard County. On Christmas Day, this detail had a running fight with 4 men. John Collins, the man who stole a yoke of oxen at Fredericksburg and drove them up to within 2 miles of our camp, was captured, as was also John Gray, wanted for murder in one of the eastern counties. Jim Pope Mason, charged with the murder of Rance Moore, was in this skirmish, but escaped. One cold morning, about the middle of January, Corporal Gillett, with Privates John and Will Bannister, Tom Gillespie, Dave Ligon, and Ben Carter, was ordered on a 5-day scout. We saddled our horses and packed 2 mules. When all was ready, I walked over to Lieutenant Reynolds. He was sitting on a camp stool before his tent and seemed in a brown study. I saluted and asked for orders. "Well, Corporal," he said after a moment's hesitation, "it's a scout after Dick Dublin again. That man seems to be a regular Jonah to this company. He lives only 10 miles from here, and I have been awfully disappointed at not being able to effect his capture. It is a reflection on all of Company E. There's one thing sure. If I can't capture him, I will make life miserable for him. I will keep a scout in the field after him constantly." I then asked if he had any instructions as to the route I should travel. No, he replied. "I rely too much on your judgment to hamper you with orders. After you are once out of sight of camp, you know these mountains and trails better than I do. Just go and do your best. If you come in contact with him, don't let him get away." After riding a half-mile from camp, the boys began inquiring about where we were going and who we were after. I told them Dick Dublin. We quit the road and traveled south from our camp over to the head of Packsaddle Creek. Here we turned down the creek and rounded up the Potter Ranch, but no one was at home, so we passed on into the Cedar Break without having been seen. On the extreme headwaters of the South Llano River, some cattlemen had built a large stock pen and were using it to confine wild cattle. This was far out beyond any settlement and probably 50 or 60 miles from our camp. I thought it possible that Dick Dublin might be hanging around the place, so we traveled through the woods most of the way to it. Here I found the cattlemen had moved. The scout had now been out 2 days, so we began our return journey. We traveled probably 25 miles on the 3rd day. On the 4th day, I timed myself to reach the Potter Ranch about night. Old Man Potter, a friend and neighbor of Dublin's, lived here with 2 grown sons. It was known that Dublin frequented the place, and I hoped to catch him here unawares. About sundown, we were within a mile of the ranch. Here we unsaddled our horses and prepared to round up the house. If we met with no success, we were to camp there for the night. I left John Bannister and Ligon to guard camp, while Gillespie, Will Bannister, and Ben Carter with myself approached the ranch on foot. If I found no one there, I intended to return to our camp unseen and round up the ranch again the following morning. We had not traveled far before we discovered a lone man riding slowly down the trail to the Potter Ranch. We remained hidden and were able to approach within 50 yards of the house without being seen. We now halted in the bed of a creek for a short consultation. The one-room cabin had only a single door, and before it was a small wagon. The Potters cooked out of doors, between the house and the wagon. We could see a horse tied to the south side of the vehicle, but could not see the campfire for the wagon and the horse. To our right, and about 25 steps away, Old Man Potter and one of his sons were unloading some hogs from a wagon into a pen. End of Section 8. Section 9 of 6 Years with the Texas Rangers, 1875 to 1881. Read by Andrew Frame. Service with Reynolds, the Intrepid, Part 2. We knew the moment we left the creek bed we would be in full view of the Potters and the ranch house. We decided then that we would advance on the house as fast as we could run and so be in good position to capture the man who had ridden into the camp. We rose from the creek running. Old Man Potter discovered us as we came into view and yelled, "Run, Dick, run! Here comes the Rangers!" We then knew the man we wanted was at the camp. We were so close upon Dublin that he had no time to mount his horse or get his gun, so he made a run for the brush. I was within 25 yards of him when he came from behind the wagon running as fast as a big man could. I ordered him to halt and surrender, but he had heard that call too many times and kept going. Holding my Winchester carbine in my right hand, I fired a shot directly at him as I ran. In a moment, he was out of sight. I hurried to the place where he was last seen and spied him running up a little ravine. I stopped, drew a bead on him, and again ordered him to halt. As he ran, Dublin threw his hand back under his coat as though he were attempting to draw a pistol. I fired. My bullet struck the fugitive in the small of the back, just over the right hip bone, and passed out near his right collarbone. It killed him instantly. He was bending over as he ran, and this caused the unusual course of my ball. The boys, whom I had outrun, now joined me, and Carter fired 2 shots at Dublin after he was down. I ordered him to desist, as the man was dead. I examined the body to make sure it was Dublin, for I knew him intimately, as I had cow-hunted with him before I became a ranger. We found him unarmed, but he had a belt of cartridges around his waist. He was so completely surprised by our sudden appearance he could do nothing but run. The $700 reward on him could never be collected, as it was offered for his arrest and conviction. Dublin's brothers, Roll and Dell, swore vengeance against myself and the Bannister boys, but nothing ever came of the oath. In the month of February 1878, Lieutenant Reynolds started to Austin with 5 prisoners we had captured in Kimball and Menard counties. They were chained together in pairs. John Stevens, the odd man, was shackled by himself. As a guard for these prisoners, Reynolds had detailed Will and John Bannister, Dave Ligon, Ben Garter, Dick Ware, and myself. On the Junction City and Mason Road, some 10 miles east of our camp, was the small ranch of Stark Reynolds, a fugitive from justice, charged with horse stealing and assault to kill. Company E had scouted for him in Kimball County and had rounded up his ranch many times. We knew he was in the county, but he always managed to escape us. As we passed this ranch, Lieutenant Reynolds, Privates Ware, Carter, Ligon, and myself were marching in front, with a 4-mule wagon following us, in which were the chained prisoners. Behind it came the Bannisters, who were on guard that day and detailed to keep a constant watch on the captive outlaws. We passed the Stark Reynolds home about 10 o'clock in the morning, and Lieutenant Reynolds remarked that it was hardly worthwhile to round up the house, as he had done so many times in the past without result, but that he would surely like to capture the fellow. We had not ridden for more than half a mile beyond the ranch when we came face to face with Stark himself. He was a small man, and riding an exceedingly good brown pony. We were about 400 yards apart and discovered each other at the same instant. The outlaw was carrying a small sack of flour in front of him. He immediately threw this down, turned his horse quickly, and made a lightning dash for the Llano Bottoms some 3 miles away. At that point, the Junction City and Mason Road winds along a range of high mountains, with the country sloping downward to the Llano River. This grade was studded with scrubby live oak and mesquite brush, not thick enough to hide a man, but sufficiently dense to retard his flight through it. We gave chase at once, and for 1.5 miles it was the fastest race I ever saw the Rangers run. We were closely bunched the entire distance. With Lieutenant Reynolds, he was riding a fast racehorse, always slightly in the lead. He finally got close enough to the fugitive to demand his surrender. Stark only waved his gun defiantly and redoubled his speed. Lieutenant Reynolds then drew his 6-shooter and began firing at the outlaw. After emptying his pistol, he began using his Winchester. The Llano Bottoms were now looming up right in front of us. The race had been fast enough to run every horse into a big limber. Carter, Ware, and Ligon dropped out of the race. Up to this time, I had contented myself by trying to keep up with Lieutenant Reynolds, for it's always easier to follow a man through the brush than to run in the lead. I had a good grip on my bridle reins and was trying to steady my pony as best I could. I now saw that the outlaw was beginning to gain on us. I ran up beside the lieutenant and said, "He's getting away from us. Must I go after him?" Lieutenant Reynolds turned and looked at me with the wildest look on his face I ever saw. His hat was gone. His face was badly scratched by the brush, with blood running down over his white shirt bosom. "Yes, goddamn him, stop or kill him." I changed the bridle reins to my left hand, drew my gun with my right, and digging my spurs deep into my pony's side, I was out of sight of the lieutenant in 300 yards. The fugitive saw that I was alone and that I was going to overhaul him. He suddenly brought his pony to a standstill, jumped down, took shelter behind the animal, and drew a bead on me with his gun. "Goddamn you, stop or I'll kill you," he cried. I tried to obey his order, but my pony was running downhill and ran straight at him for 25 yards more before I could stop. I jumped down from my horse and made ready to fight, but Stark broke for a thicket on foot. As soon as he ran out from behind his pony, I fired at him. The bullet must have come rather close to him, for he quickly turned and took shelter behind his mount again. As he peeped over his saddle at me, I attempted to draw a bead on his head, but I was tired, nervous, and unsteady. Before I could shoot, Dave Ligon galloped right up to the outlaw, ordered him to surrender and drop his gun, which Stark did at once. The boys had heard me shoot, and in 5 minutes were all upon the scene. The captive was searched and ordered to remount his pony. With one of the boys leading Stark's mount, we started back to the wagon nearly 3 miles away. As soon as the outlaw was a prisoner, and he knew he would not be harmed no matter what he said, he began a tirade against the Rangers. He declared the whole battalion was a set of damned murderers, especially Company E, and said it was curbstone talk in Menard, Mason, and Kimball counties that Lieutenant Reynolds' men would kill a man and then yell for him to throw up his hands. He kept up this running talk until he exhausted Lieutenant Reynolds' patience. The latter then ordered Stark to shut up and declared the speaker was a damned liar, for Company E never killed a man without first giving him a chance to surrender. Lieutenant Reynolds then said with the last old briar breaker captured, he had accomplished the task set him and was now ready to go elsewhere. As we rode along, one of the boys remarked that my pony was limping badly. "I wish his leg would come right off up to his shoulder," declared Stark in disgust. "If it hadn't been for him, I would have made it to the bottoms and escaped." On approaching the wagon, the prisoner Stevens, a man of some intelligence and humor, stood up and called out to Stark, "By God, old man, they got you. They rode too many corn-fed horses and carried too many guns for you. I don't know who you are, but I'm sorry for you. While they were chasing you, I got down on my knees here in the wagon, and with my face turned up to the skies, I prayed to the Almighty God that you might get away." Stark was chained to this good-natured liar, and now for the first time our prisoner seemed to realize his condition. He asked Lieutenant Reynolds to send word to his family that he had been captured. The lieutenant thereupon sent one of the boys to Stark's home to tell Mrs. Reynolds that the Rangers would camp on Red Creek for dinner, and if she wished to see her husband, we would be there probably 2 hours. Presently Stark's old gray-haired father came to our midday camp. When he saw his son chained, he burst out crying, saying, "My son, it's not my fault that you are in this condition. I did my best to give you good advice and tried to raise you right." After dinner, we resumed our march toward Austin. Stark Reynolds was finally turned over to the sheriff of Tarrant County. He was admitted to bail and gave bond, but before he came to trial, he was waylaid and killed, supposedly by relatives of the man he had previously attempted to murder. Early in the spring of 1878, a ranchman living 5 miles above our camp saw a bunch of Indians on Bear Creek, Kimball County, and at once reported to Lieutenant Reynolds. The Redskins had been seen late in the evening, and by the time a scout could be started after them, it was almost night. The lieutenant, however, followed the trail until it entered a cedar brake. It was then too dark to work farther, so the scout returned to camp to make arrangements to resume the trail the following morning. On the march back to camp, the Rangers picked up a paint pony with an arrow sticking in its hip. The Indians had probably tried to catch the horse, and failing to do so, had shot it, as was their custom. Just after dark, a runner from Junction City came in and reported a bunch of Redskins had been seen near the town stealing horses. It was a beautiful moonlit night, and a close watch was kept on our horses. Just at midnight, John Bannister, an alert man on guard, noticed that one of our pack mules hitched at the end of our picket line was pulling back on its rope and looking over a brush fence that enclosed the camp. With Winchester in hand, Bannister passed through a gate, walked slowly down the fence and into some small underbrush near the mule. Suddenly, a man rose to his feet and fired on Bannister at a distance of not more than 10 steps, then broke and ran. Bannister at once opened fire on the Indian. The very first report of a gun brought every man in camp out of his bed. We could see the flashes of Bannister's gun and went to his aid in our nightclothes and barefooted. I ran down by the picket line of horses and jumped the fence where the mule had seen the redskin. By moonlight, I could glimpse the Indian running down the riverbank. I shot at him 9 times as he ran, but without effect. Some 200 yards below our camp was a ford on the Llano, and the fugitive was making for it. Just as soon as the Indian reached the crossing and plunged into the river, 8 or 9 of the Rangers that had followed Bannister on the high ground were in a position to shell the swimmer as he crossed. There were probably 100 shots fired at him, but he finally disappeared in the brush on the south side of the river. Investigation of the place where he crossed showed the timber cut all to pieces, but strange to say, not a shot hit the Indian as far as we ever knew. We found a blanket where the savage had risen and shot at Bannister, and measuring the ground, found that the ranger was just 12 short steps from the Indian when fired upon by the redskin. It was a miracle that Bannister was not killed. The bullet, a .45 caliber, buried itself in some sacks of corn in a tent just back of him. The next morning we found where 10 or 12 Indians had waited under some large pecan trees while this scout slipped up to our camp to investigate and steal a horse. The trees were about 400 yards from camp and on the opposite side of the river. Some of the rangers jokingly said those old braves must have thought this lone one stirred up hell at the ranger camp. On account of the range cattle and horses along the Llano River, Lieutenant Reynolds lost some 8 or 10 hours the next morning before picking up the Indian trail. This gave the Redskins 10 or 12 hours start, as they were at our camp just at midnight. The trail passed out west between the North and South Llano Rivers and followed a rough mountain country that made pursuit difficult and slow. We followed the savages 5 or 6 days and finally abandoned the trail near the head of Devil's River after a heavy rain. While we had been active in rounding up the numerous outlaws and cattle thieves that infested Kimball County, we had not been able to clean up the mystery of the peg-leg stage robbers, which had long baffled the best detectives, sheriffs, and rangers. Peg Leg was a small stage station on the San Saba in the midst of a rough and very mountainous country. Here the stage was repeatedly held up, and as repeatedly the robbers escaped. The scene of the holdup was many times examined, and the parties made determined efforts to trail the bandits, but always without success, for the trail was quickly lost in the rough mountains. One of the features that proved particularly puzzling was the constant recurrence of an exceedingly small footprint at each robbery. These marks were so very small, they convinced many observers that a woman from Fort McCavick or Fort Concho was operating with the bandit gang. Naturally, the Rangers were anxious to round up this group of outlaws and put a stop to their depredations. In May 1878, Sergeant Neville made a scout up on the South Llano and captured Bill Allison, a son-in-law of old Jimmy Dublin, father of the bandit Dick Dublin. Allison was wanted on several charges of cattle theft and was taken to Austin for safekeeping. After remaining in the Travis County Jail for nearly a year without being able to give bond, Allison became discouraged. He believed his brothers-in-law, the Dublins, were not aiding him to get bond and became bitter and resentful toward them. This antagonism finally led to the unveiling of the peg-leg mystery. In the spring of 1879, Dick Ware and myself took some prisoners to the Austin jail. Bill Allison saw us and called out to me. He and I had been cowboys together long before I became a ranger. "Jim," said Allison, "you know I've been cooped up here in this jail for nearly a year. People who ought to be my friends have evidently abandoned me, and I am not going to stand it any longer. I can put the peg-leg stage robbers behind the bars, and I'm going to do it." Ware, who was something of a diplomat, said, "Hold on, Bill. If you have anything to confess, we'll get an order from the sheriff to take you to see General Jones so you can talk to him." The general at once wrote a note to Dennis Corwin, sheriff of Travis County, and asked that he let Allison accompany us to his office. The sheriff turned his prisoner over to us, and we took him to General Jones, who had a private interview with him for over an hour. What Allison confessed, we did not know, but we returned him to the jail. General Jones moved quickly, for the very next day a scout of Rangers from Company E was sent back to Kimball County. I was just preparing to go west to El Paso with Colonel Baylor, so I missed this last and most important scout back into Kimball County. However, this final expedition was so successful I cannot omit it from a history of the Rangers. Arriving at Kimball County, the Company E detail arrested Roll and Dell Dublin, Mac Potter, and Rube Boyce. In the running fight that resulted in their capture, Roll received a bad wound in the hip. The two Dublin brothers and Mac Potter, when arraigned in federal court, pled guilty to stage robbery and were sentenced to 15 years at hard labor. During their trial, the mystery of the peg-leg robberies was finally cleared up. The Dublin boys were the guiding spirits in the hold-ups and worked with great cleverness. Old man Jimmy Dublin's ranch on the South Llano was their headquarters. From the ranch to Peg Leg Station on the San Saba was not more than 60 miles across a rough mountainous country. As there were no wire fences in those days, the robbers would ride over to the station, rob the stage, and in one night's ride regain their home. Traveling at night, they were never observed. Dick Dublin, whose death while resisting capture has already been described, was the leader of the bandit gang. Even the mystery of the tiny footprints was disclosed. They were made by Mac Potter, who had an unusually small foot for a man. While Rube Boyce was confined in the Travis County Jail, he made one of the most sensational jail escapes in the criminal annals of Texas. Mrs. Boyce called at the prison with a suit of clean underclothes for her husband. The basket in which she carried them was examined, and she was admitted into the cell of her husband. However, she had hidden a big .45 Colt's revolver about her person and smuggled it in. Rube changed his underwear, put the soiled garments in the basket, and hid the pistol under them. At the end of her visit, Mrs. Boyce started out, and Rube accompanied her down the corridor to the door. Mr. Albert Nichols, the jailer, opened the door with his left hand to let the woman pass out, at the same time holding his pistol in his right hand. As the door swung open, Rube reached into the basket he was carrying for his wife, whipped out the hidden pistol, thrust it into the jailer's face, and ordered him to drop his .45 and step within the jail. Realizing that a second's hesitation would mean death, Nichols complied and was locked in by the outlaw. Boyce then ran out of the backyard of the jail, mounted a pony that had been hitched there for him, and galloped out of Austin, firing his pistol as he ran. He made a complete getaway. 3 or 4 years later, he was arrested at Socorro, New Mexico, and returned to Austin. At his trial for participation in the Peg Leg stage robberies, he was acquitted, and perhaps justly so, for Bill Allison declared to me that Dick Dublin, with his brothers Dell and Roll and Mac Potter, were the real robbers. The arrest and conviction of the Dublins, together with the other men Lieutenant Reynolds had captured or killed, completely cleaned out the stage robbers, cattle and horse thieves, and murderers that had made Kimball County their rendezvous. Today, Kimball County is one of the most prosperous and picturesque counties in the state. Its citizens are law-abiding and energetic. Junction City, the county seat, is a splendid little city of probably 2,500 inhabitants. 40 years ago, the time of which I write, there were no courthouses in Kimball County. The first district courts were hid under the spreading boughs of a large oak tree. The rangers, of which I was frequently one, guarded the prisoners under another tree at a convenient distance from the judge and his attendants. Late in the spring or early summer of 1878, at a session of the County Court of San Saba County, Billy Brown was being prosecuted by County Attorney Brooks for a violation of the prohibition laws. Brown took offense at a remark of the prosecuting attorney and attempted to draw his six-shooter on him. T.J.T. Kendall, a law partner of Brooks, saw Brown's move and quickly whipping out his own pistol, he killed Brown in the courtroom. Then, fearing mob if captured, Kendall fortified himself in a second story of the courthouse and refused to surrender. He held the whole town at bay while his wife administered to his wants. Meantime, he sent a hurry call to the nearest rangers asking for protection against mob violence. Captain Arrington received the message and sent a detachment from Coleman to San Saba to preserve order. General Jones was notified and ordered Lieutenant Reynolds at Junction City to march to San Saba with his company to take charge of Kendall and relieve Captain Arrington's men. It was probably 2 weeks after the killing before Company E reached San Saba, but Mr. Kendall was still holding fort in the upper story of the courthouse. On the arrival of Reynolds' company, Kendall asked the court for a preliminary examination. When court convened, the prisoner waived examination and asked for transference to the Travis County Jail at Austin. The court, realizing the feeling against Kendall, ordered his removal thither. When the time came for Kendall's removal, a hack was driven up to the courthouse door, where a great crowd had assembled to see the prisoner. Jim Brown, sheriff of Lee County, Texas, and brother of Bill Brown, heavily armed, had taken his station within 10 feet of the prison door. Just before Mr. Kendall descended the courthouse steps, Lieutenant Reynolds ordered the crowd to fall back 50 feet from the hack. The people immediately obeyed, with the exception of Jim Brown, who sat perfectly still on his horse. The lieutenant looked at Brown for a minute, then turned to his rangers and ordered them to draw their guns and move everyone 50 yards from the courthouse. Like a flash, every ranger drew his gun, dismounted, and waved the crowd back. Brown turned to Reynolds and said, "I am going to Austin with you. If you do, you will go in irons. Move back." Brown, who had killed several men, slowly turned his horse and rode away. He did not know the man with whom he was dealing. Lawyer Kendall was thereupon carried to Austin without incident. When we reached Austin, Jim Brown met Lieutenant Reynolds on the street and apologized for the way he had acted at San Saba. He said he fully intended to kill Kendall as he approached the hack, but the presence of so many Rangers caused him to change his mind. Lieutenant Reynolds declared he was anticipating just such a move, and had instructed his men to shoot Brown into doll rags at his first move. Soon after this, Lieutenant Reynolds moved Company E down on the San Saba in a beautiful pecan grove, an ideal summer camp, about 2 miles from the town of San Saba. From this point, we scouted all over Llano, Lampasas, Burnett, and San Saba counties at our favorite pursuit of rounding up bad men. It was from this camp that we made our sensational ride to Round Rock after Sam Bass, the notorious train robber. End of section 9.